know that you're in your buildings, and sometimes it's not as easy as just saying I'm busy. But as best you can, we ask that you be present. And so this time is valuable. If you do have a question, there's the icon under the reaction button that should be on your toolbar. It's just super helpful when we see that it'll pop up so that we all know that there's something that you want to say. So then we can just keep that flow going. And then please ask questions. The two things that Julie and I are going to go over are pretty nuanced and unique and different. And so please do not hesitate to like bring up a unique situation that maybe you have in your district, because I guarantee it's going to be informational for everybody. So don't hesitate. Please say, okay, what about this scenario? What about this situation? And let's try to walk through it together. So here are the two items that we're going to go over. Some federal requirements for students in foster care. Julia's going to handle that as our foster care expert. And point of contact for the whole state of Utah, in case you guys didn't know that. She represents all of Utah for foster care. And then I'm going to talk about district of residency. So I guess, Julia, take it away.
All right, awesome. So this is this is information that is not new, but I think when it came out, we were really aware of it, and then over time we have kind of forgotten some of this federal language and federal rule that exists, and not just us as educators, but also DCFS. And so I just wanted to run through the rule that's always existed, but in the context of this new guidance that just came out from the federal um, Department of Education in November. And so I know that this pertains to a lot of you. I've had conversations with some of you about this information, talking about a foster care point of contact as well as the best interest determination, a BID. Maybe that acronym sounds familiar to you. Maybe it's totally foreign. And then also, what is our responsibility to help students with transportation for students to remain in their school of origin? Also, just talking about the importance of keeping a kid in their school of origin, if possible. So I'm going to break these things down. We are going to break these things down by looking at this document, and I'll throw it in the chat for you. So just I'm good. Now you know what's coming next. No, I'm not worried about it.
Big
Oh,
surprise.
big surprise. So I'm going to just copy this and put it in the chat. This is the document that I will be referring to. I will share my screen and you will be able to see the just the points that I want to review. I'm also going to throw in the chat this document, which is what came out before my time here. I've been here almost 5 years. And so I think when this act came out, this document was created, that the second document I put in the chat, and it's also in your email, that Utah came together and created specific guidance. But that guidance document is not even as nuanced as this federal guidance. And so I would just like to use this um, to have our conversation today. And we're just going to, and I'm going to make you sick a little bit because I will be scrolling. These are the areas we're going to focus on today. I'm gonna tell you what it says, right? We're gonna read it together, but then I want you to ask questions around it. I also would love to know if this is new to you. Are you familiar with the it's like ESEA Act of 2015? Do you remember this? It talks about foster care points of contact. It talks about keeping kids in the school of origin and transportation. Who is familiar with it? Okay, couple of you.
Carolyn?
All right. So it's good that we're doing this together. Um, and so we're just going to talk through this. And I would love for you to chime in with, like Benji said, with any specific nuances of what's happening or what you're hearing from DCFS or things along those lines. Also, know that I am collaborating with our state DCFS person to streamline this a little bit better. We've already begun some processes that I'll just explain as we go. So close your eyes for a minute as I scroll. Um, and I'll tell you when to open them. Okay, you can open them. So in this section of this document, actually, close your eyes again. I wanted to show you the whole table of contents. There's a lot of information in here, and I think it is helpful information. We're not covering all of this information today. We're just covering those like these are really pertinent to you, and these are things you really need to understand because it applies to your day-to-day job, especially in the world of students in foster care. And all of your districts, we are serving students in foster care. And so this is applicable to all of you. So if you didn't raise your hand earlier, then hopefully by the end of today, you'll become an expert and understand what's required of you, actually. Okay, close your eyes again. All right. So I am going to do a little bit of reading, but it's not going to be a ton, but it's just these things that I've bolded. I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page with. So this section explains which students are protected by Title I educational stability provisions, the specific requirements in the educational stability provisions, and how educational and child welfare agencies should collaborate to implement these provisions. Okay, so we'll talk about who it applies to specifically, and some will apply to you, some will not apply to you. But actually, I think it all applies to you. And we can have an open discussion and dialogue about that because there are some interesting nuances. And then also how important that collaboration with DCFS is. And I really want to have a conversation. So as we go through, think about what do I need to hold them accountable to? Because it is a two-part. What I find often is I find that when it comes to education, they're like, oh, that's your issue. Well, in this document, it's a partnership issue. This is not a DCFS document. It is not an education document. It is a human services and education document. So this is designed for both parties. We're all accountable to it. All right, I'm going to come down a little bit more. Okay, so right here, I'm not obviously going to go through everything. I just want to go through the basics. You can take your own time and tear this document apart if you want to, but we're just going to highlight a few of these issues. So the first thing I want to talk about is this question A6. Do the Title I educational stability provisions apply only to students enrolled in LEAs that receive Title I sub-grants? How many of you are the schools or a school you're working within have Title I subgrant? Do you know? Okay. So a couple of you, I'm seeing some head shakes. Okay, so I'm seeing, yeah, I think most of our districts have at least a Title I school within the school district, but it is going to be important for you to recognize in some of this stuff, some of it applies to only Title I, some of it applies to everyone. But I would say because we all receive YIC funding, I could potentially make the argument that this applies to everyone regardless of Title I, but I would be okay with some pushback or some thoughts on that as we go through this. So the answer is no. This applies, so an SEA, which is me, Benji, it's the USBE team, in coordination with the state child welfare agencies, must ensure that its LEA implement the Title I educational stability provisions from this act, regardless of whether an LEA receives Title I subgrant. These provisions include requirements related to school placement and SEA POC. So absolutely, we all have a responsibility to the placement of children. So later we're going to talk about bids, the best interest determination. That applies to all of us. Okay? And then the other part of this is the foster care or the state point of contact for foster care. We have that, and I am that person. And so we're already following that rule. I've been assigned that role. And so, yes, that applies to all of us. However, under the Act, additional provisions apply only to LEAs receiving Title I subgrants. So if you raised your hand and you have a Title I school that you're serving, those Title I schools, some additional language in the Act are pertinent to you. One is related to the school of origin transportation, and we're going to go through that when you're required to help provide transportation, and two, whether or not you have a point of contact for foster care within your school district. And we're going to go through that in a little bit more detail. But again, if you've got questions or if I'm going too fast, just raise your hand or just come off mute and let me know. All right, so we're going to go through really quickly. What is an SEA point of contact? That's me. So it's just now what I do is since I've received this role, I meet with people across the nation. They communicate information to me, and then my responsibility is to communicate that to you. I also work with our state level folks to make sure that all of our foster care needs are met. And we're already doing a lot of really great work in the state of Utah. I was able to attend a conference with all of the SEA POCs. Um, and just the fact that we have funding available to us, we are like light years ahead of folks because a lot of people have zero funding other than that Title I subgrant to provide any type of resource to students in foster care. Um, okay, so right here, our LEA is required to designate an LEA POC. And so the truth to this is it depends. Well, yes, if child welfare writes a letter to your district and says to you, we need you to designate an LEA POC. For all intents and purposes, we've already designated all of you as your LEA POC. Even though DCFS didn't write a letter and say you have to, we did because we said, you want funding, you have to give us a director so that we know how to communicate with you the needs of students in foster care. So all of you are already technically considered that LEA POC. But it's only required of those that are receiving Title I subgrants to have that. So if you have a neighboring district that doesn't have any Title I, they don't have any YIC support from us, they may not have a foster care point of contact. However, I am working with the state office right now to identify a point of contact in every LEA in the state of Utah. For transparency purposes, that's going very slow. Um, but it is something that I'm working with DCFS on so that when you maybe have a student that transfers to another school district, such as Millard, or we always like to use Tintic because it's fun to say, they don't have a YIC program. However, you might be sending a kid that direction. And to help with that transition from your district to that district, it might be nice for you to have a point of contact in that district to help those students in their transition. Um, and so that's something I'm currently working on. Right now, we only have the point of contacts in the LEA that we have defined through the YIC umbrella, which is all of you. And we'll just continue to work on that. Okay. If you feel like, so when I get that letter sent out, I will send it to all of you. DCFS is just finalizing that letter because it has to actually come from them. I'm just helping facilitate this. If you decide that, hey, I wear a lot of hats and I would actually like to appoint someone else as that, maybe you want to choose your check and connect coordinator if that's not you to be that point of contact, then I would just ask you to kindly respond and let me know who that point of contact will be. But at this point, we are considering you. Does anybody have any problems, challenges, or questions about that? Okay, then I will move on. Okay, scrolling. Um, and I already covered this. Our state and local child welfare agency is required to have a POC, a point of contact, and I already reviewed that. Okay, so this next section that I want to go through is must SEAs, that's me, collaborate with the state child welfare agency to support the educational stability and success of students in foster care? The answer is yes. So for all LEAs, that means that we have to collaborate with our partners. And so to continue that, must LEAs collaborate with child welfare agencies to support the educational stability and success of students in foster care? And that answer is yes. And that is for all, not just people receiving Title I subgrant funding. So if an LEA, oh, just kidding. Nope, I joke. Yes, if an LEA receives Title I subgrant, the LEA must collaborate with state or local child welfare agencies to implement Title I educational stability provisions. And the reason I got ahead of that is because if we didn't have the YIC funding and it was just Title I, then you could argue, I don't receive the Title I subgrant. I don't need to collaborate with you, DCFS, you're on your own. However, because you do receive the YIC funding, under the rule, we require certain things for students in foster care, it's different, right? So it's not because of this document that those things are required for you to collaborate. It's because of the YIC funding that requires you to collaborate. I hope that makes sense. So when you receive the funding, you go through all of those, what are they called?
Assurances, program
The
assurances.
the program assurances that say you are going to have a local interagency council, and part of that, you're going to have DCFS part of that communication. You're going to provide an evidence-based mentoring um, model to provide to your school-based students. And so those things are going to require that collaboration, but this act won't necessarily if you're not receiving that subgrant. And let's be clear too here. The subgrant, like, do any of you even see or sit in meetings where you talk about that Title I subgrant and have like a pocket of money that supports you? So some of you do, and some of you do not. And so because we have that YIC line item, what I'm finding is a lot of our programs that do have that Title I funding don't know about it because they're using it in different ways because we have the YIC line item. But that Title I funding is also specifically for students in foster care. And so that's just something to be aware of. I'm not going to tell you to go and find that money and now utilize it for something. I know that we're able to fund you, but if you did need that, and I'll share with you one area that you will potentially need that support here in a minute. But um, okay, I'm going to continue. Any questions about that? All right, and just remember too, it's your responsibility to collaborate with child welfare. It is equally their responsibility to collaborate with you. So if you're getting pushback, you can remind them, hey, remember this act? You are actually required to talk to me. We actually need to have some conversations. This, I mean, not that I want you to necessarily do that, but it could just be another educational point. So as you invite them to local interagency council meetings, you can say, hey, as per this, you are required to collaborate with us. This is one opportunity for you to do that. All right, I'm going to keep scrolling. I know there's lots of good information here, but I'll let you look at that on your own. All right, let's transition from collaboration to school of origin. What is a school of origin? The school of origin is the public school a student is enrolled in when they enter foster care or when they change foster care placements. So, school of origin could also be charter, right? Charter is publicly funded, and so that is included in school of origin. And so it's where the student either was when they came into foster care, or if they're transitioning potentially from your school district to another school district. So, if the placement changes, you are the school of origin if they're coming from you to somewhere else, or that somewhere else would be the school of origin if they're potentially coming to you. For what length of time does the school of origin provision apply? A student in foster care must remain in their school of origin for the duration of their time in foster care unless a determination is made that is not in their best interest to remain in the school of origin. And I'm going to talk about that best determination here in a second. But as long as a student is in foster care, this applies. Once the student exits foster care, it no longer applies. So even if they exit foster care, but you're continuing maybe some check and connect services for them, this won't apply, but we are still happy with you continuing that continuity of service post exiting foster care. Does that make sense? Okay. But really, basically, once they exit foster care, you have no voice in if they stay in your school or move your school. But until then, you do have voice, and we'll talk through that. And that's what's called the best interest determination. So, I didn't highlight this, but what is a best interest determination? A bid is a process through which educational agencies and child welfare agencies partner with important people in the student's life to determine whether it's in the student's best interest to remain in their school of origin or change schools. So it's an actual process of us and DCFS collaborating to ensure or to make the best interest determination whether a student should remain where they are or if they should move schools. And I'm just going to give you like a teaser right now because I think this is the biggest challenge is transportation cannot be part of that decision making. So if you're moving a child's school due to transportation, you are in violation of this federal rule. The best determination is about other things. And so that's just a little teaser. So when must a bid process be completed under the Title I educational stability provisions? An SEA in collaboration with the State Child Welfare Agency must ensure that LEAs complete a bid process at the time of the foster care placement. So if a student comes into custody, that should be happening about like within 3 days is best practice of having a meeting to determine if that student is going to move or not. Or if a student is moving placements, then a meeting has to occur. How frequently do your mentors show up at schools and a child has moved and they had no idea? All the time. It happens all the time. And we're frustrated by that, right? And so there's some responsibility actually. That student should not move schools until they've had a conversation with you. Now, DCFS is not there. They do have policy that says this needs to be occurring, but it's not the hottest fire that they're putting out, right? And so that's why I'm working at the state level to communicate through this. But I think I want you to feel empowered to say, hey, I actually get a voice in this child moving, and I don't know that I necessarily want them to. Um, when I see like when my skin crawls a little bit when kids move schools is when we're moving them from one school within the district to another school in the district because a foster parent moved. Like we really shouldn't be doing that. Um, or when we have a student going from maybe Canyon School District to Jordan School District, and maybe they live on the border. Like we really need to be considering, is that really what is in the best interest of that student to change schools? So these are things for us to start being thoughtful of and recognizing that we have gaps. We have child welfare that is not necessarily doing these bids appropriately and they're just making decisions, but also that we are not informed as educators that we have the ability to come in and say, actually, we do have a voice in this, and we need to insert ourselves a little bit in that decision making. So let me tell you what we're doing currently to address this. I worked with DCFS at the beginning of the school year to create a mandatory training for all caseworkers where they understand what a bid is. Now, whether or not they're holding casework accountable to doing these bid meetings or process, that's still in question. And so that's still stuff that we're working through. But it's important for us to know that there are hiccups, there are barriers, but we're going to work through them. Benji?
This is just taking me back to when I was a principal and I was in this situation, and I'm curious, like, you know, in now that I've moved here, like I learn a lot more, and then I like, man, I wish I could go back and be a principal and do it again now that I actually know what the rules are and what the law is. Um, but I'm curious now. So I was in a situation where a child was in their school of origin. And then just what you said, Julia, in the same district, they were placed with a foster parent that was in a different school boundaries. This was in an elementary setting. And the foster parent requested that the kid be able to go to school at this new school where her biological children were attending because of like the cohesion that it would bring to like they're going to the same school, they get to participate in the same school activities. And I remember there being a debate of like, okay, but we want to we want to make as little like disruption to this kid's life as possible, and like so maybe it's better to keep them in their elementary of origin. And we kind of have this back and forth of like there were pros and cons to both, because like they would have they like right at this time, right, like they have a holiday concert, and like two of the kids were excited about that and the other kid was like, well, ours isn't until tomorrow or whatever. So what are your thoughts on what is more important, is to keep them in the school of origin to allow them to have like that cohesion of being with the other children in the home, to go to that school?
Is this an open-ended question
I
to everyone?
sure, I don't know. I honestly don't know that I know the answer to that, and I'm curious of what other thoughts are. And if it and I don't know, maybe I'm the only one who was in that situation, but
That's my question too. I was wondering, is that a determination for like the team at a team meeting? You know, if, because sometimes I think it would be better for the kid to be part of the, if they're part of the family, that, you know, the family is, they're included in all of that. I guess it depends on the foster care placement and how, I don't want to use the word combative, but you know, sometimes it's smooth and loving and awesome, and sometimes it's combative, you know, when it's not good for the kid. So yeah, who gets to make the ultimate determination? The case manager, I guess, or
Well, and that's Melanie, I think you're exactly right. Is that's why this is so nuanced, is because the best interest determination can't be decided by one single person. The caseworker doesn't know enough about that student. They don't know enough about what's happening in school. They don't know enough about the relationships. They don't know enough about what's happening in the foster home, right? And so that's why all of these parties need to come together to decide what is the best interest for this specific student. Benji, it might be in the best interest for that student to leave, but it's not for just you to decide or just the caseworker decide, but it's a collaborative decision that needs to be made, um, which is why this whole thing exists, is because we're trying to protect that best interest of students, not the best interest of the placement or the best interest or the most convenient thing for this person or that person, but it's really what's in the best interest of the child. And then we plan around it. So if we've decided that it's in the best interest for that student to stay in their school of origin, then now as a team, we plan how are we going to make that happen. So Melanie, I think you're right. Like, I think that needs to happen in that meeting. Ultimately, who has the final say? Um, I would hope someone's not just like, this is what we're doing. But I know that that happens. Like, I've talked to a district recently that they keep making placements of students in a meeting, and then they leave the meeting and they get an email afterward that says, actually, we're going to do this. And so this actually, I hope, empowers that district I just met with to say, well, actually, in the meeting, this is the decision that we made. This is what my minutes say, and that's how we're moving forward. So, and this is not to create like a war or who's right or who's wrong, right? It's just about going back to that collaboration piece and making sure that we are collaborating. Um, so yeah,
I
please
just feel
add
like
to
this
that.
is a really good example of check and connect mentors being aware of what's going on and that person environment fit. Making sure that we're considering the data, the conversations with the kids, the perspectives with the families. And this is where I guess I'm on my never ending soapbox of it would probably matter with like each individual situation. You know, as the kid on a football team and moving them from one school to another means they're not going to get to play when they move to the new school. Or like Melanie suggested, maybe it makes sense to move them because then the family can participate in all the activities. So I would advocate that it's probably a case by case basis. But like Julia said, a decision with a team of individuals who know the student.
Yeah. And this guidance document actually gives a whole list of these are all things, factors that should be considered in making the determination. So there is guidance to the team to help them like go through these. What is the preference of the student's parents? What is the student's attachment to the school of origin? Is the student involved in extracurricular activities, right? These are all things that help us determine what's in the best interest of the child. And it's the student that we're focused on, not necessarily the other members of the team. Um, okay, I'm going to continue just for time's sake, Benji, if that's okay. Do you feel like your question got answered?
yes,
Okay,
you may proceed. Thank you, Julia.
thank you. Um, must a student in foster care remain in their school of origin while LEAs in collaboration with the child welfare agencies complete the bid process? The answer is yes. So, yeah, so I think if you could argue that. And I know some of you will, and I know some of you will be like, when we figure out what the bid process is, then I will worry about this. And so I just want this to empower you, but also like help you support the students that you're working with and also know um, what you can do as the LEA. But also maintaining relationships and really thinking about that student first.
Julia,
Oh, please.
in the chat, Dave asked, is there a process for documenting the bid process that it was actually followed?
So I will tell you that so when I was a supervisor at DCFS, I was a supervisor in 2015 when this act came out. And it was required at that time that we created a bid in our child and family team meetings. And it was also, hold on, let me ask my husband to leave it just.
They both work from home, very close to each other. So.
Yeah, and he's actually answering my phone for me because anyway, it doesn't matter. So I hope it's not too distracting. He's focused. So what was I? Oh,
there
when I
a
was a
formal
supervisor,
bid process? Yes, thank you.
yes. So when I was a supervisor, it was the process that in the child and family team meeting, a bid would be determined by the child and family team. And that's what is in their policy. Their policy says that in the child and family team meetings, we create that bid to determine the choice of the school. There's also, DCFS also has certain things within their SAFE, which is like their SIS system, that asks specific questions like, it doesn't say specifically, did you create a bid? It just says, did you decide as a team where the school is going? And in my experience, this is just my experience, is we mark yes because I talked to my supervisor about it, or I talked to this person, or the foster parent wanted this, right? What DCFS has lost is this idea that that bid needs to be made in the team meeting. The other thing that happened in 2015 was we mandated education being a person that attends those child and family team meetings. Over time, other fires have burned and we've stopped inviting our education partners. The other thing that happened in 2015 is they have these staffings with several people when a child is removed from the home. And historically, a member of the school district was responsible or had to be at those meetings. I don't know if any of you attended those meetings back in the day when they would staff the removal of a child. And then, like, there was a guardian ad litem there, an AG there, an education partner there, a therapist. They had just kind of a committee of professionals that then would all chime in about decisions. One of those would be, do we keep a child in their school of origin? Because that education person could simply call the school and be like, hey, what is your thoughts on this? They have since then taken all of those people out of those meetings. And so we're trying to repair some things that were done in 2015 that have been lost along the way. And so that's the conversation I'm having. But just to give you some context, that's why this stuff is not happening, is because it was a fire in 2015 and it's not been a fire since. But now we have new guidance, we have new people in play. So hopefully we'll recreate that fire so that there's better collaboration for these students moving forward. Did that answer the question that was in the chat? So your answer, Dave, is there is a policy that says what they have to do. Are they currently doing it? No. Not everyone. I don't want to say across the board, no. But they have received a new training that hopefully will start seeing this. But I honestly talked to a supervisor the other day. I says, hey, what did you think of that education training? And they were like, what training? So there's still some work to do. Okay, what factors should be considered in completing the bid process? There's a whole bunch of stuff here. The appropriateness of the current educational setting and the proximity to the school in which the student is enrolled at the time. They can be factors and they need to be factors, but the educational agencies and child welfare agencies have flexibility in determining which factors can be there. I'm going to come down to this part here. Parties to the bid process must presume that remaining in the school of origin is in the student's best interest unless the bid suggests that attending another school, including any public school the student has attended previously, is in the student's best interest. So that should be the presumption over just moving a student. I think the current act that's happening is, oh, foster parent moved or student moved, now school moves. That's just what's currently happening. And so just keeping in mind that, like, while we want to consider these things, I'll show you here in a second that the transportation needs. So where it says the proximity to the school in which the student is enrolled at the time of emplacement. So if a student moves from Price to Logan, right? That's impossible, right? That's going to be the child in a car for 3 hours a day. So we need to consider that, right? Also the proximity, but from Taylorsville to Murray, that might be different, right? And so we need to just think about those things. But a movement from one school to another school within the same district, please, Chancey.
So currently, our practice has been that we don't utilize transportation for our YAC students like we would McKinney-Vento status. Like we definitely do that. And so are you saying this is now changing and this is something we have to look at policy-wide for our district?
Yeah, this isn't changing, actually. This has
This
always
has
been this
been,
way. We just
okay,
haven't highlighted it, and that's partially on me. When I became the foster care point of contact a year ago, my eyes were opened wide. And so this has been a year in the works of me trying to really figure out what is the actual policy so that I can help guide. So that Chancey, like we had a situation where you reached out to me once about a student moving from one school to the other. At the time, I didn't understand these rules, right? And so
okay,
I was just trying to say, yeah, why don't you let YIC number? Like I tried to help you keep that student where they were, right? The district was pushing back. But if I understood this, I would have been like, actually, Chancey, you're required to keep that kid where they're at, and we're required to help with that. And I'll talk about transportation here in a minute.
perfect.
Julia,
Yeah.
for my own clarity, this form, is it specific to foster children or to any? So if Chancey was brought up a situation of a kid in JJYS custody, these rules would not necessarily apply, correct? Or am I wrong?
No, you are not wrong. So this is students that are in foster care, and it actually defines, sorry, I'm making you dizzy. It does define foster care here. So JJYS and so this would not apply to a JJYS student. So foster homes of relatives, so kinship homes, group homes, emergency shelters, residential facilities, childcare, pre-adoptive homes. This is specifically for students in foster care. Good question.
Which I know complicates it for us because we get both, right?
And we treat them all the same, right? And here's what I would argue too is if you're going to use YIC funding, you're trying to keep a kid that's in JJYS custody in their school of origin, then great. Like that's what's in the best interest of that student. If you needed to use some YIC funding for that transportation, I don't think our team would have a problem with that. But when it comes to our students that are in foster care, that's a different level of accountability. However, there are some nuances to that as well because the transportation. So let's see where we're at, and then we're gonna get there. Close your eyes for a second. Let me remind myself where we were. School of origin, best interest determination. Okay, so let's jump into transportation, and then maybe it'll answer some of those questions too. Can transportation costs or administrative burdens be considered in completing a bid process? Transportation costs should not be considered when determining a student's best interest. Similarly, administrative burden for the educational agencies or child welfare agencies should not be considered when completing a bid process. So one, the cost of transportation, and two, the burden it puts you as administrators should not be considered in the bid process. Those are things that we would need to work around. Must SEAs and LEAs use a specific procedure when completing a bid process? The Title I educational stability provisions do not prescribe a specific procedure to go back to your process, Dave, but DCFS does have it outlined in their policy. I have met with DCFS about saying we need to clarify this and change your policy. And so they're in the process of changing their policy currently. And so just know that's happening. I'm going to scroll down. Who should be involved in the bid process? Sorry, we're still on bid. All of these people. So at the very least, I think what I think is important for you to know is you should be there, whether that's you or the mentor, but somebody within the school that has a relationship with that child and can give insight into the education of the child. So actually, you probably are not the best person to attend that. It's probably your mentor or a teacher or something along those lines. Not that you are all not just on top of it and know every child inside and out, but I'm not going to assume that because I know you're very busy. Okay, so when we come down to transportation, what's an LEA's role? Okay, so here's where it gets nuanced. LEAs receiving Title I funds are required to collaborate with child welfare agencies to implement clear written procedures governing how transportation to maintain students in foster care in their school of origin will be provided, arranged, and funded for the duration of the student's time in foster care. So so those of you that if the student school of origin does not receive Title I funding, then that transportation actually this conversation does not apply. However, so you could argue that, and that would be fine. You would win that argument. I think my encouragement would be you receive YIC funding. And it is often, we do want to do what's in the best interest of a child. And so I would encourage that collaboration for all YIC students. However, you could make the argument this student, it's not Title I. We're not going to be tapping into any Title I funding. We don't have Title I funding to tap into to help with that transportation. So we are not going to. I also know that we at YIC level, we have not designated specific transportation dollars to you for students. And so that's something that my team needs to talk about and we need to figure out. But I would say that currently you all have some carryover. Currently you all give us a lot of money back at the end of the year, right? So if you do have ways to help fund that, that is not something that our team would argue against or be frustrated with you spending dollars on. Benji, would you back me up in that statement?
Yes.
Because he knows exactly what I just said. Okay. Yeah, of course he does. So I just wanted to throw that out there. If there are additional costs incurred in providing transportation to the school of origin, the LEA. So here's the other thing too, is it's not just your responsibility to pay for the transportation. And I know a lot of schools have been reaching out to me saying, isn't it your job to provide the transportation? I'm like, well, do you have a bid? And their answer is no. Oh, well, then the conversation stops there. So let's create a bid, and then we can have the conversation about how are we going to pay for transportation. So if there are additional costs, then the LEA will provide the funding to that if one, the local child welfare agency agrees to reimburse the LEA for the cost of such transportation. So you can provide it, and then child welfare potentially reimburses you. Two, the LEA agrees to pay for the cost, so you can just agree to pay for that. That can be a decision that you collaborate on and make. Or three, the LEA and local child welfare agency agree to share the cost. So the burden does not have to be 100% on you. So if you're getting a sense from DCFS that, well, this is your problem because that's what I've heard. No, it's actually a shared problem. So we need to share this. So if we decide that we're going to use an Uber, which a lot of states are doing that, then we will share the cost of that Uber. Or if we're going to use public transportation, like a bus pass, I know a lot of you ask for funding for bus passes. We've said, well, child welfare should pay for that, but actually we can too, right? Like it can be a shared cost for those bus passes. And so, but that is a decision that's made between agencies. It's not just a decision that's made for you, but one of those three decisions should be made in helping cover the additional costs of transportation. Sierra?
So this is a potentially very simplistic question. I just want to make sure that I have clarity on it. Our district has some schools that receive the Title I funds, other schools that don't. So is this saying like as the LEA, if you receive Title I funding, regardless of the school of origin, like we would be responsible to make this decision on covering the cost of transportation, or is it only the school of origin that, I mean,
And
best practice
we're a small district, we should probably just cover it, period, but I'm just curious on the like fine print there.
And I don't know that I've gone through the fine print to say specifically, but I know, but this says the LEA is receiving. So
So
I think my
generally,
initial response is if your LEA receives Title I, period, um, then you would. However, there might be something in this document that says school by school. I did not read to that degree. So I might have to get back to you, but I think you should presume that if your LEA receives Title I at all, then yes.
makes it more clear. So I'll actually take that.
Okay. Okay, I think that was all. Oh, and then here is just what details should be written. Sorry, should the written transportation procedures include? This just gives you some guidance of how you and the child welfare agency can create that procedure. And honestly, that might be student by student, right? Not necessarily this is how we're going to handle all things transportation. You might want to have a policy, Chansey, right? Like we should have a policy about how we're going to handle this in general, but that partnership with DCFS might be student by student. And so there might be degrees of how you decide to handle that, but it is your responsibility as an LEA to do that. So while I am going to continue to work with DCFS and provide you guidance, this isn't something that I'm saying ignore until I tell you more. It's something that I would like you to be thinking about. And if you can be proactive about it, that would be great. So I'm going to come back to this slide, our slideshow, and I'm going to show you, if you're not aware, DCFS has liaisons in every region of the state. That is their education liaison. I'm going to provide a similar training to those liaisons. Hopefully soon. I'm working that out still. And so that when and if you have communication with them, this conversation, they're not going to be blindsided. That's not yet scheduled. I will let you know when it's scheduled so that you know when they receive it. However, if you do have conversations prior, you can just point them to this document that I've shared with you to just say, hey, we're trying to get on top of it. There's new guidance. We're just making sure we're crossing our T's, dotting our I's. But these are your region liaisons. I know several of you work very closely with these people. I know some of these people are not as hands-on as others. But I would encourage you, if you don't know them, to reach out to them to build that relationship, because they are designated to handle all education administrative needs. Case by case, student by student, it's going to be more of that supervisor, that caseworker, but as a whole, it should be these folks. Or if you can't get a hold of your caseworkers or supervisors, then these are the people you would go to get to that level if you needed to. And that's also tricky for a lot of you because you might have students placed in your district from other regions, right? So even though, Melanie, you're in the Western region, you might have kids from the Northern region. And so you might have to reach out to that Northern person liaison. Eric is not going to always know what's happening up north. So I think we will share these slides. We can share these slides, right? Benji, do we plan to share these slides?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, we'll share these slides so you'll have this, or if you want to take a screenshot of it or whatever you want. And then obviously you have me. I like to help if I can. I'm a great helper. So no, I like to help. Also, if we're having a hard time getting a hold of these folks in your regions, then I can go to our state representative, who's been really great at helping make connections as well. All right, I know I just threw, because not a lot of you had your hands up at the beginning, that was probably a whole lot of information and a lot of crap, right? That's how I have felt for the last year, oh crap, how am I going to handle this? So I just want to let you know a couple of different ways that I'm attacking this is one, working directly with DCFS. Also, I sit on the Child Welfare Improvement Council for the state of Utah that oversees just helping child welfare in general, giving ideas of how to improve their practices. We have made a very specific recommendation to DCFS that they have to respond to about these issues. And so we're tackling it from this end multiple ways. Um, but we are government and we move slow. Um, it's just so hard. Anyway, so just know that I am working on things. I'm happy to support. I'm happy to facilitate meetings. I'm happy to bring people to the table to have conversations. Whatever I can do to help you, great. But at the very least, the things you can control, just have this policy, this language in your brain so you know how to tackle a few of these things a little bit easier, especially when I think that school of origin transition, I think you can immediately do something about that, right? Like Chancey, that situation that we ran into, you could have immediately come back and said, actually, that student needs to stay where they're at. Everyone agrees with that. We need to just fund that or figure out how we were going to do that. So, any questions or concerns about anything that I just reviewed with you? You know where to find me. So if you do, holler. Okay, take a deep breath, everyone. Maybe stretch your arms. I know I need to. And then we'll move on to the next agenda item. Which, Benji, do you want me to give you control now?
Uh,
Or do you want to just tell me and I'll open things and you just kind of direct me?
yeah, maybe I'll tell you. I just put in, just before we move on though, I just put into the chat uh, just a part which I was actually looking for this document when Julie asked if I would back her, so that's why I was a little distracted. Um,
I
but
hear
the
you.
answer is yes, I always back you, so don't even worry about it. So you'll see here, this is the statute on enrollment. Um, and so this again is specific to DCFS, not JJYS. And so we do seem to have a little more specified and specific support with foster children and DCFS as opposed to JJYS, which I know gets a little bit confusing because we support both. But there's very specific references to this. So you'll see here that right that the statute says that a student shall be allowed to enroll in any school regardless of where they reside, if it's in their best interest. So and as far as and Julie, I don't know if it specifically says, but when it comes to the the bid, BIP is a behavior intervention plan.
Different, yeah.
Which sorry. So in the bid, so there's collaboration, right? Every once in a while, though, you don't agree, right? Like there's not consensus on what is in the child's best interest. And when the child is little, in particular, the child's voice is not always that helpful because they don't necessarily know and they're going through whatever. Um, so if there is not consensus, does it clearly state that someone gets to make the call, or does it not? Does it just leave it as it's collaborative?
I think that that's a good question. And I guess I need to probably find that specific language in this guidance document. Um, but I would imagine that what would a parent have a final say or would a school have a final say? And so I do think that like in this language it says as determined by the Division of Child and Family Services, it is their responsibility ultimately to have that bid. And so I would say that bid would be the final decision, and it would be DCFS that made that final decision. But I would argue, if I were you as an educator, that if I was not included in making that bid, then they did not follow the appropriate process. And then they could take your input, and if they still don't like your input, then they could potentially, I mean, that's just off the cuff. I would need to read about that. I'm curious about how you would handle that in your current role and understanding how to work with caregivers and parents.
Guys, have any of you been in that situation? Have you had opposing views on what is in the best interest and you struggled to come to a consensus, or have you been able to? Nacho's nodding his head, so this has happened for you. So what happened, Nacho?
So actually just recently, this is perfect. So I had a student that just went into care in our district. Their school of origin was like, we think that they should be sent to Landmark, the alternative school. The student is not on track to graduate with either school. Okay. They have an IEP. And so in talking with the case manager, we felt like it was best for them to stay at the school that they were at, knowing that they're still earning credit. Either way, they're not on track to graduate. But overall, there's probably more support at that school. The school kind of disagreed. There was some pushback. Ultimately, to be honest with you, I just, in talking with the case manager and the foster placement, and even with the student, was like, look, come to Landmark. I know that's not necessarily what you want, or necessarily even what I thought was in their best interest, only because I felt like their school of origin had more resources in terms of their IEP. But I knew that ultimately I would take care of them and I would make them feel wanted, as opposed to, it was obvious that their school of origin didn't want them, right? But like, I felt like if it was their case manager, the student, everybody wanted to stay there. And it wasn't a situation where if they stay there, they can't graduate, because they couldn't graduate through us either, right? It's going to be whatever. So I felt like it would have been nice to say, hey, this is what's been decided. You can suck it up or whatever you want, because they're staying there. So, but that didn't happen. And I'm doing the best I can with that student here, and they feel welcome and everything. So that's the good part. But it would have been nice to say, hey, like, this is what's been decided, they're staying there.
Always fun.
And
All
there's
right.
nuances, right? Every
Yeah.
situation is the same. We push kids out of places all the time just because we don't want it to be our burden anymore. And I'm not saying we as in this room, but as a society.
But
Well,
now through this process, though, just so I'm clear, now through this process, could have said, well, we went through this bid process. This is what's been determined by DCFS. So that student is going to stay at their school of origin. That's how I'm
Yeah.
interpreting it. And that's how
And what I would do is I would encourage you to get somebody from that school of origin, you and DCFS at the table, and the decision is made there, right? And then it's in writing, it's been documented, and we're moving forward. So if it was like 2 against 1, they probably would have lost out. But if it's you just navigating all the different places and now you're just trying to make everybody happy, not suggesting that's what you did, Nacho, but it sounds like you did concede a little bit to just, well, and because you also knew like they clearly don't want that student, and that's something to keep in mind. So I don't think you made the bad decision, because ultimately we want this kid to feel cared about, but it's frustrating that they couldn't feel cared about in their school of origin. Um, and then that would be the decision. Like your decision was based on because the kid needed to feel cared about, which if that school of origin understood that that was the determination, that's what decided that this was why it was in the student's best interest, probably wouldn't want that documented anywhere. Um, just saying. So yeah, I would utilize that process in helping back decisions that you're trying to make, but making sure that the right people are included to make that decision.
and and I would use this. I mean, it's think of it as the same process as an IEP team, right? So like the bid isn't just DCFS, but it's a team of people, right? And in IEPs, I mean, I'm sure you've all been in team meetings where there's not consensus in an IEP meeting either, right? That there's different opinions on uh, what is in the child's best interest, and so sometimes there are some concessions that are made by at least one or two individuals because the greater team feels that certain action is better. But I was curious, and I was still am a little bit on just if like if there is opposing views, does one party have the ultimate authority to make the call? I mean, at least in enrollment, it looks here in the statute that I put in the chat that DCFS would ultimately have the say in where to enroll the child regardless. Um, but I think like with all things, I don't know that DCFS wants I would assume that they want collaboration with you guys as well, right? Like they don't want to be making these decisions without having good information and having collaboration on what's best. But that's what it would look like to me. So, all right. I've got 20 minutes to talk about District of Residency. Just as a quick brain break, uh, take 2 minutes, put in the chat your best stocking stuffer like present ever. Like what is the best thing that you've ever gotten or put in a stocking stuffer? If you want to be specific and maybe think of the best things that you could put in for like maybe a 16-year-old girl and like a 14-year-old boy and 13-year-old boy, any ideas on what to get your mom for Christmas too? All of these would be awesome ideas to just put in the chat right now. Go. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Dan. It's a fantastic idea. A Costco sized box. What? How big are your stockings, Julia?
That's what I said. It overflowed. So it was mostly like stuffed to the brim and then sitting in a pile of Cheetos.
Oh, chicken and a biscuit. Right, that's good. Lottery tickets. Okay. That
Oh,
we'll
that's
have to
fun.
go to Idaho, but yeah, we could do that.
Wyoming.
Yeah, or Wyoming, yeah. I mean, okay. All fantastic ideas. Uh,
Cheetos.
Angie, I
It was in her
think we need,
office, and if you missed it, Benji, I'm sad for you because I almost stole it. Just saying.
I don't think in Angie's office or in Cherie's.
It was in Angie's office. Oh, she's gonna show you. Look,
Oh,
it's
there
a
you go.
crocheted F-bomb. It's the best
Oh,
thing
I
ever.
love
There's the
that. Oh
F-bomb.
my
Yes.
gosh, I need to learn how to make that
That would be good. That's like you put that in the toe of the stocking. That'd be perfect.
instead of an orange.
Yeah. Okay. Some of these ideas were good ideas. Some of them, I think you're messing with me, but okay. Thank you though. Um, oh, that's good. Okay. District of Residency. And again, I appreciate Julia going through this. I know in my practice as a principal, I was always taught like if you are accepting a student outside of your district, like you can make that decision on whether to accept them or not, but it's on them to provide their transportation. Right? Like that was just like standard for me as like, well, if you're coming from out of district, like that's fine, but you're on your own to get here. And so I know that's why I thought this was like super important because that's not true when we're talking about foster students. Okay, so this situation, this flow chart, I cannot take credit for. Karen Harrop, the special education director for Ogden School District, made this. And do you want the actual Word document, Julia?
Yeah, I was just gonna open, I have it. I'm just
Okay.
gonna move
And
it.
this is attached in the email that you got from Morgan, so that because there's a lot of information on it. So this situation has come up a few times in the last year or so for us, particularly when it comes to day treatment centers. So and so this I'll just use Ogden as the example because this really happened, and this is why Karen met with us and helped us develop this flow chart. The situation was the child was living in Weaver School District with Jen, but a day treatment center was in Ogden. And for those of you that aren't familiar, Ogden, Weber School District makes a complete circle around Ogden. So Ogden is just like inner city Ogden, and Weber completely surrounds it. So you can live in Weber and drive 5 minutes and be in Ogden district, right? So it's not like a big transportation thing. So the parents resided in Weber. They were dropping their kid off at the day treatment center in Ogden, and then would pick the kid up at like 5 o'clock and take him back home. So then after a little while, specifically then the parents complained to Ogden and actually made like a state complaint that Ogden was not providing their students required IEP services, to which Ogden said, "You're not our kid. You don't live here. You live in Weber. So it's not our responsibility. It's Weber's responsibility." To which they said, "No, our kid is here during the day, like they're with you, in your district boundaries." So that's come up a few times in different places of some back and forth of like, well, who really has legal responsibility for the kid? Just I can see your faces, so just show of hands, has this scenario come up for you since you've been a YIC director? Have you gotten word of this at all? No. Okay. Well, you're going to learn about it today anyways, and then maybe it will show up for you, and then you'll know what to do. So this comes down then to the district of residency of like who has actual legal residency responsibilities. Um, so there are some statute references um, in this document. So you'll see, yeah, 26B-2-116, 53G dash. So those are statute references, so that you can look those up if you'd like to see. I think I did provide them in the email as well. Like there's some links to it also. So an HSP is a human service program, and there's a long list of what is defined as that. Residential treatment centers count as that, day treatment centers. There's about a dozen different kinds. Those seem to be the ones that we use the most. So if a human service program exists in your district, with an educated, entitled student, then we look at, have they submitted an education service plan, which, Julie, if you scroll down just a little bit, these acronyms are referenced here in the key in the bottom left corner of what these are. So just so you have that reference. So the education service plan is what is submitted on the youth educating coordinating form. So have you received youth education coordinating forms as the YC director in your district? Raise a hand for that if you've gotten those. Okay, awesome. Do you know what to do with those when you get them? Chancey says yes. She knows. BJ, yes. So I've learned a lot about these as well in the last little bit working with the Department of Licensing. One key factor with that is the education service plan is the burden is on the HSP to develop that plan. The burden is not on you. So if they put as their education service plan, well, our plan is that BJ will send 5 teachers to our building, and BJ, like you have the right to say, no, that's not like we're not going to do that. And then if you don't agree to it, then technically they would not be able to get licensed because they don't have a plan because you're not fulfilling that plan. Having said that, we are in the best place to provide the best educational plan, because the owners of the HSP, they're experts in providing mental health services, not necessarily educational services. So we still absolutely want you to be a partner in this, and we want to do what's best for kids that are in some type of crisis, or I mean, they're at these locations for a reason, right? And so we want to do whatever we can to provide the best education, but that is on them to ultimately, if you don't agree um, to it, then they don't get a license. Um, so with that plan, they would have submitted that. Julie, if you could go back up a little bit so we can kind of follow this flow chart. Thank you. Okay, so first of all, if you have not received that youth education coordinating form, then immediately that should be the conversation that happens, is that before we start talking about who has district of residency and who is responsible to provide services for the kid, you would inform that HSP that you have not received a youth educating coordinating form, which in the case in Ogden, that was true. They had not submitted that to them. So Ogden didn't even know that this place existed. They had no so they certainly didn't know the kid was there. They didn't even know that the HSP was there. So they corrected that and submitted a coordinating form. So now we would move over to yes, there is one. So now we look at, is the student a minor? Just because we know that there are, like some of you have some chrysalis homes, for example, that have kids that are not minors. And so there are some situations uh, where that's the case. But then, so then we would look at though, as far as the statute goes. So if you're saying, is the kid a minor? No, the kid is not a minor. Okay, well, are they their own guardian? And if the answer is yes, so they have been I'm spacing the word. What does that mean when you're 18 and you become your own guardian?
Emancipated?
Emancipated, yeah. Isn't
Correct.
that the term we're looking for? Okay, so if the answer is yes, they are their own guardian, then the answer is, okay, they are a resident of where that HSP is. Okay, so so that is then determined, right? So the student is a resident of that HSP and they reside in wherever that district is. But if the answer is no, they're not their own guardian, or yes, they are a minor, it takes us to the same spot, which then we look at, does the parent have legal guardianship? And so then we have our different scenarios here, right? So the main part, and I'm going to let you go through some of these on your own for the sake of time. But the main part that I want to bring up, which I think is what's going to impact you more, is if the student's parents reside in, say, Weaver District, but the HSP is in Ogden, and the parents want Ogden to take educational ownership because it is in the best interest of the child because they are at this location during the school day. If the parent wants Ogden then, or the alternative district to take ownership, there is actually a form, which I didn't know about until somewhat recently, that the parent needs to fill out and submit to the alternative district where they want that district to take ownership. So here's the form, which again, we're given a copy of. So looking at this, right, so in this case that I'm talking about, the current educational setting would be Weber District at, I don't know, Weber High School. And then the proposed would be Ogden School District at George Washington High School, right? So that's what they are asking. And then this line right here, please explain why the student's physical, mental, moral, or emotional health will best be served by considering the child to be a resident for school purposes. That line is taken directly out of statute. Okay, so that is what the statute says, that if there is a determination made, that we can change the district of residency. So Ogden School District then would get this form from the parent, and that is on the parent, not the HSP, but it's on the parent to submit that. You then can either approve that or not approve it. Obviously, if you approve it, then they become part of your district, and then you have all legal responsibility for that child. If you deny it, um, so if you deny it, then the parent has within 10 days, they can appeal to the state superintendent, who is currently Sid Dixon. So they could appeal to Sid and say, well, I think the district got it wrong and they should be considered that. So I talked to Sid yesterday and just kind of asked her, like, what factors would you take into consideration on whether you would uphold or reverse a district's determination to deny a student? And ultimately, it was all of our favorite answer. It depends, right? Like, it's case by case, it's unique. Um, but I ult mostly though, her answer was there has got to be a really good reason as to why you would deny the student's educational services. Like if the parent is requesting, they filled out this form, they feel like because the student is during the school day residing in your district, there's got to be a really good reason as to why you would say no and put it back on where the parents live. So she's like, it's hard for me to say exactly what that would be because in 30 plus years of being an educator, I think I know most situations, and then you do get a completely unique, totally unpredictable scenario that you go, huh, okay, yeah. In this situation, I guess it does make sense to deny, but it's hard to predict because you don't know it until you see it. Um, so that is, I think, kind of ultimately the main point. I mean, like I said, you can go through this flow chart and kind of see all of the different types of scenarios that we have. Any questions about that on district of residency? Who has legal educational responsibility for a kid? Nope. Okay. Well, you have the form, although that form, to be honest, we're going to change it just a little bit because board rule does say right there, you could see like when Julie had it up, there was just simply a checkbox of either approve or not approve, and that's it. And the board rule R277621, which is on there, it does clearly say on there that you have to give a reason why, like in writing, you have to give a reason, and there's nowhere on here to give a reason. So we're just simply going to add a text box on there where the LEA would then provide a reason. It says to provide a reason for either scenario, even if you approve it, like you're still supposed to give a reason as to why you're approving it. But certainly if it was denied, we would want the parent to have the reason why it was denied. And then if they appeal it to superintendent, they would obviously share that form to say, well, this is why the LEA said that they're not going to do it. I would also recommend if you were ever in this scenario and you were ever in a situation where you were going to deny, it's not a bad idea to just reach out to us if you're going to do that. And we can kind of have because you have 10 days to make that determination. So within that 10 days, wouldn't be a bad idea to reach out and ask. Um, Superintendent Dixon did recommend as well, if you think that you're going to deny, you all have your own legal teams in your LEAs, be a good idea to run it past them as well to see if, if they would back you in court if it came to that point. So. All right. Well, that was a lot of information. Hopefully it at least gives you something to refer back to if you get put in that situation. These are questions that we get. We regularly get the transportation question. And just for whatever reason, in like the last year, we've gotten like 3 questions from 3 different districts on this district of residency and arguments on who has to provide the services and who doesn't. And so we thought we would share what we learned from the statute. So, all right. Well, everybody, I hope you have a great holiday. Hope you get a couple weeks off and actually take them off and not go into your office and work. Well, sometimes it's nice to go in when no one's there to bother you and you can get so much done. It feels so good. But hope you have an enjoyable time and that you all put Apple Watches in your kids' stockings as Dan clearly does with his gaggle of children. They all get Apple Watches and Dave gets Pop-Tarts. So, I mean,
And ammunition.
and ammunition, whichever way, it's all good things. All right. Well, take care, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Benji.
Benji.
See ya.
Thanks,
And
Julia.
you
Thanks,
have a minute.